Mr. T.O. Hardiman, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Yeah, my name is T.O., Mr. Ceasefire Hardiman, President of Violence Interrupters, not-for-profit organization. It's an honor to be here with you today, young man.
But did you hear about the recent comments that Joe Biden made referencing or comparing the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. to the killing of George Floyd?
Yeah, I heard actually, I listened to the interview and it put me in the mindset, whereas Joe Biden, when he was running for president, he said, "You're not black if you don't vote for Joe Biden," okay? So once again, we have a president who happens to be a Caucasian guy, which I love all human beings. I have nothing against Joe Biden, but for him to compare George Floyd's untimely death to Dr. Martin Luther King, who was actually the leader of the civil rights movement here in America and worldwide, there's no comparison at all. That goes to show you that, in my opinion, Joe Biden is kind of out of touch with reality, especially when it comes down to the black community, because Dr. King's assassination, what the people back then were attempting to do, they were attempting to stop the civil rights movement. Even though Dr. King was assassinated, but civil rights was passed, a lot of good things happened for African-American people. We moved forward to a degree. George Floyd, that death was more of a worldwide situation dealing with police brutality, excessive force and everything that goes along with it. But you cannot compare George Floyd's death to Dr. King's death. To me, it was like an insane, crazy kind of statement
comparison.
Coming
that
from
makes sense. That
yeah,
makes sense.
Older Joe Biden. Yeah.
Well, I was actually thinking the same thing. I was like, in that context, I don't think comparing MLK Jr.'s death to George Floyd was appropriate. However, I did a little bit of research today, actually, and I found out that that clip was actually from a post conference he did shortly after George Floyd's death. Did you know that?
Well, I heard a little bit about it. Yes, indeed.
I still think it may not have been the best comparison he could have done. However, I think what he was really, the point that he was trying to touch on was saying that the use of the mobile phones and the ability of how the news of George Floyd's death was able to travel much quicker. And I think that maybe the graphic depiction may have caused an uproar, worldwide, that ultimately had other effects. But at the same day, it has helped move the movement or the cause forward. I just think that maybe that was not a statement that should have been made, honestly.
Well, you know what? You can compare George Floyd's death to the death of Emmett Till. That would have been probably more appropriate. Considering what happened to Emmett Till down south there, and then you look at George Floyd's death. The only similarities to the assassination of Dr. King would be the riots and everything that took place after George Floyd's death. You have to understand, this police officer had his knee on this man's neck for like over 9 minutes, and George Floyd called for his mother. Dr. King knew he would be assassinated because he was a real champion for the people. But it's like trying to compare apples or oranges when you look at George Floyd compared to Dr. King. That goes to show you that Biden might be kind of out of touch with what's going on in the year 2021, 2022 year. In my opinion, I believe he's out of touch because there's no way in the world, because there's been so many African-American men in particular that have been killed due to an act of excessive force, police brutality. And even Dr. King was fighting against police brutality back in his day and time. And what's crazy is this is what's crazy. Back during the civil rights era, the Black Panther era, the Black Power era, the people were fighting against police brutality and excessive force. It's crazy because here in the year 2021, 2022, we're still fighting, for some of the same issues, some of the same problems that our forefathers had to fight for. That's what that does not make no sense at all.
How do you feel about some of the Republican members of Congress who have made comments about Joe Biden's comments, and those comments are inappropriate? Do you think they genuinely believe that his comments are inappropriate, or do you think that, it's just a political stunt, Biden conquer?
Yeah, I call it politics. That's the word that I use, because what the Republicans are doing, they're seizing opportunity to use politics to kind of, everybody, they're always looking for something to put out there on the president, looking for something, it's vice versa. If you had a Republican as president, the Democrats would be looking for something to nail them to the cross. And that's what the Republicans are doing right now. Some of the commentary, because, Mitch McConnell, he just made a statement that African people are voting more than Americans now. Something like that. So if he made a statement like that, how is he really?
People in Africa right now, or people?
No, he's talking about African-American people that live in America. He used the word, you can look it up. He said something, I'm not quoting him verbatim here, but he said that African people are voting more than Americans right now here in the United States.
Okay.
That's what his statement was similar to that. But the point I'm making right now with that statement, that goes to show you they're out of touch with the African American population here in the United States, and there's no real communication there. There's a communication gap with some of the white elected officials and Black people in general, because sometimes you're trying to make statements from a mountaintop instead of going down into the valley talking to the people. Some politicians, they just want the Black vote, but they have no interaction with Black people
Right.
on a serious basis.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I guess that kind of brings into the conversation the current, filibuster in DC right now in the Senate, where they were trying to prevent the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
Right.
So it seems as I don't really know too much about, the voting laws that the Republicans are trying to pass or trying to stop, but I do know that they're big on identification. And now I do believe that you should have a form of identification when you go to vote. Many methods in which both parties or whoever is behind these elections use to sort of pad the election results. There's been cases of dead people voting. I don't know how true this information is. I haven't done much research on it. But I think that what needs to come into the larger context of this conversation that we're having is that are these voting laws, are these methods that the Republicans are trying to use to stop particular communities from voting? And that's something that I'm looking to do more research into to find out what is the reason behind some of their actions, particularly in the with the recent filibuster, for the Democrats trying to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
Well, when it comes down to, there's been a long history of voting problems here in the United States. Basically, the Republicans, they would like to make sure that we do not have a repeat of what happened in Georgia. You see in some other states where you had some Democrats, secure some of them U.S. Senate seats, and then they had people waiting in line, and they're trying to pass policies that you could not, no one could bring you water while you were waiting in line. And then we need to really clear up a lot of the misunderstandings and misperceptions. Some people think because they're ex-offenders, they cannot vote. In some states, that could be part of the law, but you can vote once you're released from prison. You cannot vote once you've been convicted of crime while you're serving time. But once you, complete your sentence, you can register to vote and become a voter here in the United States. But I believe that the Republicans, in some cases or another, they're trying to do whatever they can do to obstruct or discourage people from going out to vote, making people self-doubt themselves. Well, I may not be qualified to vote. I cannot pass this particular hurdle or this particular policy. So some people may think that's the law. And that's why we have to do our best to educate people throughout the United States about the voting rights. And that's one thing about Dr. King. He was strong on voters' rights and all that kind of good information there. In a blast from the past, there was a time in the United States women could not even vote. So you're still dealing with like a predominantly Caucasian administration, no matter what we say when it comes down to trying to pass policies. Even though we have a lot of African Americans in Congress now, we still are dealing with a predominantly Caucasian system where they want to try to suppress people by any means necessary. That's why we have to educate people on a regular basis.